Hey guys, welcome to Mitch's Vinyl Corner and thanks for stopping by. I'm really excited today to share with you guys my entire Rolling Stones collection that I have. I'm going to start doing a little bit of a mini series about my favorite artists, all of the albums that I've collected of them over the years. So the Rolling Stones are, without a doubt, one of the greatest rock and roll bands of all time. I was fortunate enough to see them live back in 2013 in Anaheim, California, during their 50th anniversary tour. They were just incredible. One of the best bands I've ever seen live. So with the Rolling Stones albums, it's kind of a mixed bag because the issue, as I stated previously, if you watched my top 5 rock and jazz records that you should own when I talked about the album Sticky Fingers, is that the Rolling Stones were constantly a touring band, so they never stayed in one recording studio. If they were on tour somewhere and they wanted to record an album, they just went into that studio and they recorded. So in terms of sound quality and pressing wise, it's kind of hit or miss. Now, the majority of my collection are US pressings. I have a couple Japanese pressings, but I actually have no UK Decca pressings. Those are highly sought after. They're worth a lot of money. They're just too big for my pocketbook at the moment. So I'm going to be mainly focusing on the US pressings. So all the albums before Beggar's Banquet, in just my opinion, I'm not saying that they're bad or anything, but a lot of them are a lot of old blues covers, which is really, really good. But I personally feel that Beggar's Banquet was like the start of their greatness, if that kind of makes sense. Like the Beatles, like kind of worked up to their masterpieces, and I believe this was the Rolling Stones' first masterpiece that they put out. Not so heavily focused on just pumping out hit singles, more of just going with an overall feeling of the album, right? Another issue with the albums previous to the Beggar's Banquet is the US and the UK versions. Now, with like the Beatles catalog, the US track listings on a lot of their albums, I believe, prior to, I think, Sgt. Pepper's, the track listings were different in the UK and the US because the US was more focused on getting out hit singles, and the UK market was more about overall album sales, if that kind of makes sense. So, starting off with Beggar's Banquet, you've got killer tracks on here. You've got Stray Cat Blues, you've got Street Fighting Man, and Sympathy for the Devil. Absolute killer songs. Now, I believe the later versions of this album had, I think, like a bathroom stall kind of album cover. I'll put it up here so you can see it. I believe that was more on, I think, the CD versions. I could be mistaken, but this is a gatefold. Rolling Stones doing their thing, partying pretty hard, excess, you know. Got the track listings here on the back. If you're looking to start your Rolling Stones collection, I highly recommend you start with Beggar's Banquet. The next one is Let It Bleed. Now, you should own this album just based off of Gimme Shelter alone. That is probably one of my all-time favorite Rolling Stones. It's probably my number one Rolling Stones song, if I had to be completely honest. That song, to me, it sends chills up and down your spine, especially when that female vocal kicks in, where she's hitting those high notes. Like, it's just a shout away. That's a pretty bad interpretation, but if you've heard the song, you know what I'm talking about. So Let It Bleed, you've got Love in Vain, Midnight Rambler, Gimme Shelter, Can't Always Get What You Want, Honky Tonk, Country Honk, which I believe later became Honky Tonk Woman as a single. I think this was just a kind of a different version of it, but awesome album. This is a first US pressing, and if you can find the first US pressings with the original poster, You're pretty lucky. Let's put that back in there. Now, if you watched my video previously, the top 5 rock and jazz records, this album needs no introduction. This is the Rolling Stones' Sticky Fingers. First U.S. pressing, I believe this is a club copy. This album just really shows what the Rolling Stones were all about. Down and dirty, greasy, rock and roll, blues, just how I like it, right? Excuse me. Can You Hear Me Knocking? Brown Sugar. I mean, just this whole album is just incredible. Like I said it before in my previous videos, this needs no introduction. This is my favorite Rolling Stones album, hands down. Nothing else comes close. You need to own this. You need to own this record. Oh, actually, first U.S. pressings actually had the actual zipper that actually pulled down, and there was just underwear underneath. So this was a famous Andy Warhol shot. And I believe later pressings just had it imposed in the photo, and it actually wasn't a real zipper. So the next one is the Rolling Stones' Exile on Main Street. Now this was their first double album. I've heard this called more of a concept album because they actually recorded this, I believe, in France because they were dodging UK authorities due to tax evasions. I think that's the story behind the making of this record. But you've got a lot of killer tracks on here. You've got Rocks Off. You've got Soul Survivor. There was a lot of going on in this album. A lot of critics, a lot of fans say this is the Rolling Stones' best album. I agree that it's great, but it's just not my favorite. There's some tracks on here because it is a double album that maybe aren't as good, maybe it's some filler. Like, not every track is killer, sorry. It's just not, at least in my opinion. But this is probably my third or fourth favorite Stones album, so really, really, really good. Also, I mean, you got Tumbling Dice on here, which is a standard at all their live shows, so really good. If you get a first U.S. pressing, I believe they came with all of these postcards. I actually didn't know that they came with the postcards until a couple years after I owned the album. I actually went to the sleeves and found these things, so lucky me. Water bottle. So I got two versions of this next album. Rolling Stones Goat's Head Soup. Now, I would probably say this is my third favorite Rolling Stones album. My second one I'll get to a little bit later. I actually prefer this Japanese pressing. This album was released in 1973, so this is a 73 first U.S. pressing. And this is a 1979 Japanese reissue. I think that the Japanese reissues, these ESS versions, you can tell it's got ESS on top. I believe these ones sound a little bit better than the US, maybe because my US is maybe just a little bit more beat up than the Japanese vinyl. If you're familiar with Japanese vinyl and Japanese pressings in general, the pressing surface is immaculate. Now, the mastering, that's a whole nother story that I don't want to delve into. Some people complain about the lack of bass on certain albums when it comes to Japanese pressings because they emphasize, the high end and the low end, but the mid range and the high end, and then they take away all the bass. But in this particular album, the bass is definitely there and it's definitely present. So, highly recommend if you can find the Japanese pressing, I'd go with the Japanese pressing. over the U.S. personally, but this is going to be more plentiful here. Killer songs on this album. I mean, you've got Dancing with Mr. D, which is just, I mean, what an opener. What an opener. You got Heartbreaker, you know, do, Heartbreaker. You got Angie, you got Silver Train, and you got Star Star, which actually is it's sometimes called Star Fucker, so that's a really good song. One of my all-time favorites. Back in here. No edits this time. We're just doing it live. The next album is It's Only Rock and Roll. So this track on here, you've got Ain't Too Proud to Beg, a cover, and then you've got Little Dance, Little Sister Dance. That's one of my all-time favorite Rolling Stones songs. I think it's kind of underrated in my personal opinion. So, I mean, this album, I think by critics, if I'm not mistaken, was kind of not, I don't want to say panned, but kind of mixed, because you had just a string of, you know, Sticky Fingers, Exile on Main Street, Goat's Head Soup. This one was kind of like, it's not as good as the other ones. I really like this album. It's not as regarded as much as I think it should be. I think it's kind of underrated. But yeah, definitely highly recommended to be in your collection again, as well as all these albums. I'm going to tell you, if you're really into the Stones, you should definitely get all these. This is the first U.S. pressing again. Really plentiful. They sound really good. You're not going to have a hard time finding one in good shape for a decent price too. The next album I should say, but I got two different versions, is Black and Blue. Now, I don't think this album gets the love that it deserves. I think this is the most underrated Rolling Stones album in their catalog. Hand of Fate is one of the best Rolling Stones tunes that you'll ever hear. It's down and dirty, it's greasy, you know, it's got everything that you want in a Rolling Stones album. Now, this was recorded in, I believe, 1975, so it's kind of got a disco-y vibe to it, if that kind of makes sense. I don't know. I don't think disco was... I think it was still very much in its infancy, and it really hadn't exploded like it would in a couple years. But it's kind of got more of that feel, like kind of more like a club feel, which I actually personally like. So again, U.S. pressing, you won't have a hard time finding one. The Japanese pressings, again, I don't know if it's just because my copy is a little bit more beat up than this one. This one has all the great dynamics on it. Again, this series, the ESS series with the green Obi strip, they're all 1978, 1979 Japanese pressings. Highly sought after. Really go. I mean, I think this was like $50-$60 when I picked it up. So the Obi itself really gives the Japanese pressings their value. If you find Japanese pressings without the Obi, they're a little bit cheaper. But if I'm going to own Japanese pressings, in my personal opinion, I want the Obi on it. Now, this is my second favorite Rolling Stones album. Some Girls. I got two different versions. This is a U.S. promo copy. It's got the hype sticker on it too, and I don't know if you can see it. It's actually got the gold stamp promo on it. Yeah, not for sale. So everybody knows this album. I mean, Miss You is definitely such an iconic song. I mean, you hear it on the radio all the time. I mean, you got Respectable on here, Shattered, Beast of Burden, When the Whip Comes Down. This is just such a great Rolling Stones album. It's got blues, it's got disco, it's got it's got everything that you want in a Rolling Stones album, especially from this time period. And I got a 1979 Japanese pressing as well. When it comes to this album in particular, between these two, I think they both sound really good, so I'm not going to prefer the Japanese pressing over the U.S. pressings. Now, there's a lot of U.S. pressings around, so you won't have trouble finding this one. But what gives these ones a little bit more value is the Lucy cover. Now, that's Lucille Ball from I Love Lucy, right? So when this album initially came out, they had different celebrities all over this album cover, and I think Lucille Ball actually sued because it was done without her consent. She didn't agree to it. The Stones just put it on there. So later, subsequent versions, I think, have the celebrity photos docked out, and I think it's just the band members themselves. But yeah, this is just such an amazing album. So can't say enough more about it. And then the last of their studio albums that I have is Tattoo You. Now, after this period, I don't want to say the Rolling Stones like kind of dipped, but their output from the 80s is, I'm going to say it's really not that good, in my personal opinion. They kind of had a comeback in the 90s, I think, with I think like Voodoo Lounge and a couple other albums that they had in the 1990s. Those are actually pretty good, but they're really hard to find on vinyl, and if you find them on vinyl, I think they're really, really expensive. So Tattoo You, I think, was like the last great Rolling Stones album, in my opinion. So, I mean, you got Start Me Up, Hang Fire. I mean, great songs on here, too. So that covers all the studio albums. So I'm going to go into the live albums now. The Rolling Stones were known for their live shows. One of the greatest live bands ever. As I said, I got to see them live. One of the first ones I'm going to talk about is actually a bootleg. Now, everyone's like, well, what's a bootleg? Well, a bootleg is I'm going to say an unauthorized recording of a band. So this was I'm not sure if this was actually a soundboard recording or actually like somebody in the audience actually recording this. So this is Liver Than You'll Ever Be. I think this was recorded in November of 1969, I believe in Oakland, California. This was one of the first live rock bootlegs ever put out. So it's got the stamp right here. Now I bought this as it was, so the previous owner actually wrote on here. They actually wrote the track listings, but if you find one that hasn't been written on, it initially came with just the stamp on here. You had Give Me Shelter, Sympathy for the Devil, Honky Tonk Woman, Street Fighting Man. Now, bootleg recordings are not known for their sound quality. Again, if they're taken from the audience or like a really crappy soundboard, they really don't sound that good. But this sounds incredible. I mean, there's definitely parts where it drops out and, you know, it kind of gets like muffled in a way. But this is just such an amazing live album. I think it's better than some other actual like live recordings that was actually done with a really good soundboard, a really good sound system. But you can find these. I don't want to say they're impossible to find, but you can go to some record stores, record shows, and you can definitely find this album. So if you get this album, you're definitely going to be very happy with it. Now the next one is their official live album, their second one. I believe their first one was Got Live If You Want It. Excuse me, I'm just forgetting the name of it. But this is Get Your Yayas Out. Now this was actually recorded a couple weeks after the Liver Than You'll Ever Be bootleg. This was done in Madison Square Garden, November 27th and 28th of 1969. And this was mixed by the legendary Glenn Johns. Now, Glenn Johns worked with a lot of bands. He worked with the Beatles. I believe he worked with Bad Company. So he's highly renowned as a great, great engineer, or sound engineer, I should say. Now, I really, really enjoy this album. This is, I don't want to say this is better than Live or Than You'll Ever Be, but it's kind of on the same level. The version of Midnight Rambler on here is, I can't even describe. It's just so damn good. Probably the best version I've ever heard of that song. Jumpin' Jack Flash, you got Sympathy for the Devil, Honky Tonk Woman, Street Fighting Man. So for an official Rolling Stones live album, this is definitely essential in any collection. If you don't collect the Rolling Stones, but you just really want a good live album, highly recommended. You can find these pretty much everywhere. Now this one I just recently got when I was up in Pittsburgh on vacation, my hometown. I actually have not listened to this one yet, but I've listened to the clips on YouTube. So this is from the Rolling Stones from the Vault. Now these are official live recordings released by the band. So this one is from the Marquee Club in 1971. Now, I really enjoy this album. Again, I haven't listened to the vinyl yet, but I've listened to it on YouTube. It's not recorded in front of thousands of people. I think there maybe 100. Maybe I don't even think there were that many people actually in this club. This version actually came with a DVD of the entire show, which is really cool. You got some old ticket stubs. You got some advertising here. This is a really, really good show. Really good sound quality. Again, from the YouTube that I was able to listen to. There's a bunch of other ones. I believe there's the LA Forum. I believe there's Hyde Park. They have a whole series that they've released of all their live stuff. So if you can find this one, I highly recommend it. It's got more of a laid-back kind of vibe. Again, not recorded in front of thousands of people, just in front of a few people. You get some clapping. It's just kind of got more of that. It kind of feels like you're there in a way. Okay, so that covers all the studio albums that I have and the live ones, but I wanted to throw one last one out here. Now, this is the Rolling Stones compilation Hot Rocks, 1964 to 1971. And this is a great gateway into the Rolling Stones catalog. It's got all of their early stuff from prior to Beggar's Banquet, and it's got everything from their debut album all the way to Sticky Fingers. So Wild Horses, Can't You Hear Me Knocking. It's a double LP. And it's just, they've got all of their hits on here. All their singles, all their number ones. And this is a first U.S. pressing again. And if you can find it with all the, actually came with this little pamphlet. So it shows all of their other albums released prior to it. Oh, Got Live If You Want It. Yeah, that was the name of the Rolling Stones' first official live album that they put out. All right, guys, that covers my Rolling Stones catalog. I hope you all liked it. Again, in the coming weeks, I'm going to do some other artists that I have a big collection of and talk about them. So thank you guys for stopping by. I'll see you guys next time.